My name is Lenora Albright. The day I collapsed, the silence in my house was so complete, I heard the kettle click off before I hit the floor. It was a Wednesday. Morning sun streamed through the window, the kind of light that makes dust sparkle. I'd just finished folding towels. My back ached more than usual, and there was a strange pull in my side, like a tight fist forming beneath my ribs. I ignored it, of course. I always do. I've raised children through the flu, cared for my dying husband with pneumonia, worked double shifts at hospice on nothing but cold coffee, and cracked knuckles. What was a little pain? But this wasn't just a little pain. I remember grasping the counter, trying to breathe, the tea towel slipping from my hand. Then the world tilted slow at first, and suddenly everything was sideways. I must have hit my head on the way down. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, just waited. You'd think a woman who spent her life looking after everyone would have someone, anyone, checking on her. But as the sun rose higher and my body lay cooling on the tile, I realized something unbearable. There wasn't a soul who'd come looking. My phone was charging on the counter just above me, buzzing quietly. I could hear it, but I couldn't reach it. I imagined my son's name flashing across the screen, Ben. My daughter's Marissa, but they weren't calling. That part I knew in my bones. 3 hours must have passed. I counted the creaks of the floorboards above as the house warmed. A breeze came in through the cracked window and made the curtains flutter like ghostly hands reaching for me. At some point I blacked out. The next memory is sharper. Cold air, lights, voices. She's hypotensive, BP's 78/50. Do we have a name? She has a medical alert tag, Lenora Albright 74. Someone found me. Later I'd learn it was the mail carrier. A new guy, not the usual route driver. He noticed mail piling up on my porch and peeked through the front window. Said he saw a shadow that looked too still. That shadow was me. In the ambulance I kept my eyes closed. I didn't want to explain to the EMT that no one was coming. That there'd be no family at the hospital to meet me. No panicked children racing down hallways. Just me. And the truth. The truth that the woman who once kept everyone alive now lay forgotten, like a misplaced grocery list. At the hospital, a nurse asked gently, "Do you want us to contact your emergency contacts?" I shook my head. I'd already been forgotten while alive. I didn't need the pain of hearing it confirmed through silence. Instead, I let them do their work. IV lines, scans, monitors. The diagnosis was sudden and cruel. A small undiagnosed tumor had caused internal bleeding, that tight fist in my side. It was my body breaking down quietly while I kept folding towels. "You're lucky the paramedics found you," the doctor said. Another hour, and, well, let's just say this could have ended differently. Lucky, the word sat sour in my mouth. No, I wasn't lucky. I was invisible. It wasn't always like this. There was a time I was everything to everyone. I was the woman who stayed up through every flu season, who drove to late-night practices with thermoses of soup, who paid my daughter's first college tuition installment by cashing in my wedding ring. When my husband Carl was diagnosed with ALS, I left my job and became his full-time caregiver. No hospice, no nurses, just me, a manual lift and prayer. And when he passed, I thought the worst pain I'd ever feel had already come and gone. I didn't realize the real wound was yet to form. Watching the people I raised, cared for, and sacrificed everything for disappear. The days following my hospitalization blurred into sterile lighting and gentle smiles. Nurses were kind but rushed. Volunteers brought flowers, donated arrangements from canceled orders. I had a room to myself, but it felt like a cell. Quiet, isolated. I stared at the door every time it creaked open, hoping to see Ben or Marissa, but it was always just someone with a clipboard or medication. I told myself they must not know. Maybe they hadn't checked their phones. Maybe something urgent had come up. But the nurse confirmed it. "We called the numbers you listed. Left voicemails. No response yet, but we'll keep trying." Voicemails. That word echoed louder than my heartbeat. On day 4, I asked for my phone. There were no missed calls. No messages, just a few ads and an old group text with my book club, reminding me that next month's book was being changed from historical fiction to something lighter. Lighter. It felt like a cosmic joke. That night, I cried for the first time since the collapse. It wasn't loud. Just a single sound like a teacup cracking in a quiet room. I wasn't afraid of dying. I'd seen too many people go to fear death. What I feared was being erased, forgotten, discarded after a lifetime of giving. But in the darkest hour of that night, as I sat up slowly in my hospital bed, I made a decision. I wouldn't beg for their love. I wouldn't chase their attention. I would survive, quietly, and they would remember me, but not in the way they expected. The hospital released me 10 days later, but I wasn't the same woman they wheeled in. My body healed faster than my spirit ribs bruised, but intact tumor removed vital stable. But something inside had shifted like a door that had once swung open to everyone, now closing slowly, one hinge at a time. The discharge nurse asked if someone would be picking me up. I laughed. A short, sharp breath. Then I said no. I'll call a cab. She paused, sympathy softening her face. Would you like us to reach out again? To your family? No, thank you, I said. They're busy. She nodded. The kind of nod you give someone who just admitted their house burned down and there's nothing left to salvage. I stepped into the chilly morning light alone. My legs shook under me, but I didn't ask for help. I pulled my coat tighter and told myself this was the last time I'd pretend anyone was coming. The taxi driver was young, mid-20s maybe. He looked in the rearview mirror and asked if I was all right. I said yes, and then I told him to take the long way home. I wanted time to think. And the truth was, I didn't want to go home. Home was where I fell. Home was where I waited frozen and bleeding for someone who never came. But I had nowhere else to go. As we passed the park, I saw a mother pushing a stroller. She looked tired, a little bit like me 40 years ago. I wondered if she would raise children who would vanish when she needed them most. I hoped not. Back at the house, everything was exactly as I left it. Tea towel still on the floor. Clock blinking. Dried blood at the corner of the cabinet where my head had hit. I didn't clean it. Not yet. Instead, I sat in my favorite chair and opened the worn photo album on the coffee table. Page after page of faces that looked back with smiles. My children, Ben and Marissa, were chubby-cheeked toddlers in the early pages, then awkward teens with braces, then young adults at their graduations. There was a photo of Ben holding his daughter, the granddaughter I hadn't seen in 3 years. Another of Marissa dancing at her wedding. She'd texted me once that day. Too busy for pics now, love you though. I stared at that album until sunset, and then finally I cried again. Not because I was hurt, not because I was angry, but because I finally understood. I had become a living ghost in my own family. It didn't always feel like this. When Carl died 21 years ago, I was surrounded by casseroles and condolences. The house overflowed with people. My sister stayed for a week. The kids hovered, checking in constantly. I thought they loved me. I'll be fine. And for a while, I volunteered at the library. I joined the garden club. I babysat the neighbors' twins every Thursday. I crocheted baby blankets for the local hospital. But slowly the calls from my children became fewer. First weekly, then monthly, then just occasions, birthdays, maybe Christmas if they weren't traveling. I never told them when I had knee surgery, didn't mention when the washing machine flooded the basement. I told myself I was being kind, spared them the burden. That's what mothers do, right? But maybe that's the lie we tell ourselves when we're afraid no one would show up even if we asked. That week after the hospital, I did what I always do. I took care of things. Grocery delivery, trash out, medication organized. I put the tea towel back where it belonged. I didn't call Ben. I didn't message Marissa. I waited. 2 more weeks passed. No one called. Not a text. Not an "Are you okay?" Not even a forwarded meme or a typo-laden LOL. I could have disappeared again, and the only one who'd notice would be the mail carrier. But someone did notice. And it wasn't who I expected. It was a card. Plain white envelope. No return address. Inside was a handwritten note. Dear Mrs. Albright, I don't know if you remember me, but I'll never forget you. You sat with my mother every day the week she died. You brought her chamomile tea and read her poems. You were the only one who made her laugh. She said, "That nurse is an angel." I never said thank you. I'm saying it now. If you ever need anything, anything at all, this is my number. Alia Rodriguez. I stared at the card until my vision blurred. I hadn't remembered her name, not until I read it again. Her mother had passed in room 217. I remembered the woman's hands, small spotted, always cold. I remembered how she used to hum an old hymn as I brushed her hair. And now, years later, her daughter remembered me. The same week my own children forgot I existed. I picked up the card again just to hold it. Someone had seen me. Someone still saw me. That night, I wrote Aaliyah back. I didn't ask for help. I didn't know how, but I told her thank you. I told her that her mother had meant a great deal to me too. I sent the letter not expecting a response. But 2 days later, I heard a knock at the door. I opened it. And there she was. Aaliyah Rodriguez. Older now. Wiser. Wearing a soft gray coat and holding a thermos of chamomile tea. "Thought you might like a warm drink," she said, smiling. I looked into her eyes, and for the first time in weeks I felt human again. Not a ghost. Not forgotten. We sat together in the living room, Aaliyah and I. The chamomile tea fogged up my glasses, and I laughed for the first time in weeks. It wasn't a loud laugh. It came from deep in my chest like something buried for too long, finally exhaled. She told me about her job, now a nurse just like I had been. She worked nights at a different hospital. "I remember watching you with my mom," she said. "I used to think if I could make one person feel the way you made her feel, then I'd be proud of my life." I didn't know what to say. Compliments like that hit different when your own children haven't returned your calls in over a month. She looked around my house. "It feels warm here," she said softly. "Lived in, but lonely too." I nodded. No use denying it. "Anyone checking in on you?" "No one," I said, stirring the tea slowly. "Used to be different." We sat in silence for a while, and I think that silence said more than words. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. She placed it on the table between us. "I brought this from my mother's nightstand. Been holding on to it." I unwrapped the cloth and found a small wooden cross and a photo, faded but clear enough. It was of her mother in bed, smiling weakly at the camera, and in the corner of the frame was me. I stared at it. "I took that," Aaliyah whispered. "Mom insisted. Said, 'This is the only person making this bearable. I thought you should have it.'" I held the photo as if it were a relic. In a way, it was proof that I mattered, that my life of service hadn't been invisible. Later that night, after Aaliyah left with a promise to come back next week, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I pulled out a notebook and began writing. Not a journal, not a memoir. A list. A very different kind of list. Who showed up? Aaliyah Rodriguez, a stranger. Former family of a patient. Mail carrier. Also a stranger. Who didn't? Ben Albright's son. Marissa Albright, daughter. Rebecca Cole's sister. Greg Albright, brother-in-law. Even Angela, my old church friend. It looked cruel on paper, but it wasn't meant to be petty. It was meant to be clear. The next morning, I went to my lawyer. Her name was Dana Winchell. I'd worked with her a few times, first after Carl's death, then when setting up my modest estate plans. She was sharp and didn't waste time. "What can I do for you, Lenora?" she asked, folding her hands. "I want to change my will." She raised an eyebrow. "All right. Reallocating anything in particular?" "All of it," I said. She blinked. "That's a significant change. Do you want to talk about why?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Because I spent 74 years pouring myself into people who left me behind the second I became inconvenient." She didn't ask any more questions. Just opened her file and clicked her pen. "All right," she said. "Let's start with beneficiaries." That afternoon, I got a text from Marissa. It said, "Heard from Greg you were in the hospital. You okay? Sorry, been swamped. New manager quit and I'm taking over temporarily. Let me know if you need anything." I stared at it for a long time. Not a phone call. Not a visit. Just a digital ghost of concern. Polished. Safe. Distant. I replied, "I'm fine. Everything's already taken care of." She heart-reacted the message and said nothing more. I deleted the thread. That weekend, Aaliyah returned. She brought groceries unasked. Asked if I wanted her to stay a while, offered to help reorganize the pill drawer, refill prescriptions, clean out the fridge. I tried to pay her. She refused. "You were there for my mother," she said. "This is the least I can do." I stared at her and wondered what twist of the universe had made this woman more of a daughter to me than the one I'd raised. You know, I said carefully, my actual daughter hasn't visited in over a year. Aaliyah frowned but didn't ask why. Family's funny, she said. People think it's made of blood. But I've seen enough in hospitals to know sometimes blood's just paperwork. That night, I framed the photo of her mother and placed it beside my wedding picture on the mantel. I stood back and looked at them both. Carl, my loyal husband, and a woman who'd trusted me in her final days. Side by side. I wasn't alone. Not really. But I was done waiting to be remembered by people who only saw me as a responsibility. If they saw me at all. 2 days later, I received a group text from Ben. It was a photo of his daughter's school play. Olivia crushed it as Tree 2. So proud of her. No mention of me. No. How are you feeling? No, let's FaceTime. Just a snapshot of a life I was no longer invited into. I watched the video once. Olivia stood in the background waving her arms like branches. She was 7 now. I hadn't seen her since she was 4. I used to babysit her every Friday. Now I was a stranger who didn't even get a wave. I opened the contact. Clicked remove from favorites. Then I did the same for Marissa. I wasn't doing it out of spite. I was making space. Space for people who would knock. People who would bring tea. People who would stay. I started cleaning out the attic the next morning. Not because it needed cleaning, though it did desperately, but because I needed to do something with my hands. Something old. Something slow. There's a kind of therapy in dusting off forgotten things. You start to realize how much you've carried, how long you've kept what no longer serves you. A yellowed cardboard box marked Carl. Office sat in the back. I hadn't opened it since the year he died. Inside were his ties, his fountain pens, and a folder of retirement papers he'd never lived to use. I touched the silk of a navy tie and felt that ache in the throat. The one that means a sob is nearby, but not ready. Below it, I found something else. My old nurse's journal. It was small leather-bound pages full of scribbles and patient names, symptoms, notes of comfort. But also quotes, snippets of poetry, things patients said that stuck with me. One entry read, "Mrs. Travers whispered to me, 'You're the last face I'll ever see. I'm glad it's yours.'" I held the book close to my chest. My life had meaning. Real, intimate, irreversible meaning. Even if my children didn't see it. They were too busy becoming professionals, curating their lives for social media, chasing validation from people who didn't remember their birthdays. I raised them to be independent, and they succeeded. But independence without roots is just drifting. The next day, I mailed out 5 letters. One to Aaliyah. One to my former neighbor whose husband I'd once cared for during cancer. One to the mail carrier I had to ask the post office for his name. One to Dana, my lawyer. And one to myself. They were invitations. Not to a party. To a gathering. I held it on a Sunday afternoon. Nothing fancy. Tea, cookies. A few chairs set up in the backyard under the sycamore tree Carl planted the year we bought the house. The sun was soft, the air crisp. Alia came, of course. She brought lemon bars and wore a sweater her mother had knitted. Dana arrived next in jeans and a kind smile, a bottle of sparkling apple cider under her arm. Then there was Mr. Tomlinson, the mail carrier, shy, maybe mid-30s. "I almost didn't come," he admitted. "Thought maybe I'd be intruding." "You saved my life," I told him. "You belong here more than most." The neighbor, Mrs. Geary, came last. She used a walker now. "I can't stay long," she said. "But when I got your note, I cried. No one invites me anywhere anymore." We sat for hours sipping tea and talking like old friends. I told them I was rewriting my legacy, that they were a part of it. That blood hadn't earned the right to define family in my life anymore. They all listened quietly. Then Dana leaned forward and said, "Are you sure you want to go through with the estate changes? Families sue over less." I smiled. "I'm not afraid of a courtroom. I'm afraid of being remembered as someone who waited at the window until the day she died." The next day, I finalized everything. The will, the power of attorney, the donation paperwork, the legacy trust. Ben and Marissa were removed. Not out of malice, out of clarity. In their place, I listed 5 names. All people who'd shown up, not when it was easy, but when it mattered. I included a letter for each of them, and one final document for my children, a letter to be read upon my death. That night, as I shredded the old papers, I felt something lift, like a burden sliding from my shoulders. Decades of silent giving without acknowledgement gone, erased in curls of paper and the sound of a machine grinding it down. And then, on a Wednesday, 3 weeks after the hospital, Marissa showed up, unannounced, wearing a pantsuit and holding her phone in one hand, Starbucks in the other. She kissed my cheek like nothing had happened. I had to be in town for a meeting, she said. Figured I'd swing by. Swing by. As if I were a grocery store or a dry cleaner. I offered her tea. She declined. We sat across from each other, the clock ticking far too loudly. "How have you been?" she asked, scrolling through her phone. "I was in the hospital," I said flatly. She glanced up. "I know. You're okay now, right?" I didn't answer. Instead, I said, "Did you know I almost died?" She blinked, then offered a weak smile. "But you didn't." And that was it. No follow-up. No apology. Just a sip of coffee and a glance at the clock. "I have to run in 15, she said. "But I'm glad you're okay." When she stood to leave, she gave me a quick hug. "Love you, Mom." I didn't say it back. I walked her to the door and watched her car drive off. Then I stood there silent, unblinking, for a long time. Because that was the moment I finally buried the illusion that she still cared. 3 days later, Ben texted, "Heard Marissa saw you. Hope you're good. Olivia's play went great, we'll send pics soon." He never did. I didn't reply. That weekend, I walked to the community center. I passed the bench where Carl proposed to me in 1968, sat on it for a while, listened to the wind. Inside the center, I handed the receptionist a packet. "My estate lawyer will be following up," I said. It was the deed to my house, donated. The home I raised my children in. The place they no longer remembered. I told them to turn it into a shelter for women over 60 with no support. Name it after someone who never got one. Name it after her, I said, handing over the framed photo of Aaliyah's mother. And include a room with a window facing east. The receptionist's eyes welled up, and I smiled, because I had finally become what no one expected. Free! I didn't tell anyone I had donated the house. Not Ben, not Marissa. What would be the point? They didn't ask. And if they did, it wouldn't be out of love. It would be out of concern for what they might have lost. Instead, I packed slowly, deliberately. Every box was a ceremony. Every drawer emptied felt like a page turned. I labeled things for donation for the shelter, for the local thrift store. I even labeled a few boxes. Burn old receipts. Half-written letters. Pieces of my life that no longer needed witnesses. Alia came by one evening to help carry things down the stairs. She never asked why I was moving. She didn't need to. I found a place, I told her, handing her a box of linens. She nodded. "Is it smaller?" "Much. Just 1 bedroom." "Good," she said. "Easier to clean." We both smiled. There was something unspoken between us now, like a code. Only women who've been forgotten understand. I moved into a small rental cottage on the edge of town. 1 bedroom, 1 window, 1 old porch. Swing that creaked like a memory. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I'd downsized my square footage and in return, gained a kind of peace I hadn't known in decades. The landlord, a widower named Ray, was kind and quiet. He fixed the faucet before I even noticed it was dripping, left a basket of firewood by the door the first night the temperature dropped, asked nothing of me but always waved. I liked that. The first night I slept there, I dreamed of nothing. Not Carl, not the kids, just a blank slate. When I woke up, I opened the window and breathed in clean air. I was 74 years old, and finally starting over. 2 weeks into the move, I got a call from Dana. "Hi, Lenora. I just wanted to let you know that all the paperwork has been processed. The transfer of the house is complete. The center's planning a dedication ceremony next month." "Thank you," I said. "And we've sent your final letters." There was a pause. "Do you want to know when they receive them?" "No," I replied. "I'll know." The letter to Marissa was short. "You used to love climbing trees. You once told me I was your roots. But when the storm came, you didn't look back. I forgive you, but I will not reward your absence. This is not revenge. This is remembrance. I just want to be remembered by the people who stayed." The one to Ben was simpler. You once fell off your bike and cried until I ran down the street barefoot to hold you. I would have done it again. I'm sorry that when I needed holding, your hands were full. I hope your daughter never feels the ache I felt. I hope you teach her how not to. I didn't hear from either of them, but I did hear from someone else. A young woman named Cora called me out of the blue. Is this Mrs. Albright? I'm the director of the new housing shelter, the Albright House. I wanted to thank you. We just received your photo and plaque. We're placing it in the common room. Her voice caught. One of the women we took in last week saw your name and started crying. She said you used to bring her hot meals on Thursdays. She said, "That woman saved my life before, and now she's doing it again." I covered my mouth with my hand. It was too much. Too much joy. Too much grief. Too much proof that what I gave to the world had finally circled back. The night before the dedication ceremony, I stood in front of my old mirror, one of the few pieces I'd brought with me. The frame was scratched, the glass a little warped, but it held my reflection like it always had. I looked older now. My skin was looser, my eyes held a quiet fatigue. But behind that, there was strength. There was steel. I tied back my hair, chose a navy dress Carl had loved, and pinned a small brooch at the collar, his initials etched into a silver rose. The ceremony was small, but powerful. The plaque read, "The Albright House, in honor of Lenora Albright, for a lifetime of care returned." When they unveiled it, the crowd clapped. Some cried. Alia squeezed my hand. I didn't speak. I just stood there, and in that moment I knew they would remember me, not as someone who begged to be loved, but as someone who gave everything, then gave again to those who deserved it. Later that week, I received a letter in the mail. The handwriting was familiar, stiff, controlled. It was from Marissa. "You always said silence was the loudest sound." I didn't understand it until now. I don't know what I expected. Maybe I thought you'd always be waiting. Maybe I never thought you'd choose someone else over us. But you did, and I guess I deserve that. I hope you're okay. I hope you're happy. M. No apology, no phone number, just those words. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, not to keep it close, just to know it existed. That evening, I received a message from the shelter. One of the new residents wanted to meet me. She said her mother used to speak of me often, that my name was known among certain corners of town as the quiet nurse who stayed until the very end. I sat by the fireplace that night with a cup of chamomile tea and thought of all the people I'd sat beside. How many of them had no one else? How many of them made me more of a mother than my own children ever allowed me to be? There's something brutal about love without reciprocation, but there's also something transcendent about love that asks for nothing and gives everything anyway. And maybe that's what motherhood really is. Not a title, not a bloodline, but the steady presence in a room full of fading lights. The next time I saw Ben was by accident. I had gone to the pharmacy downtown, a rare outing, but I liked the fresh air. As I waited in line to pick up my prescriptions, I saw him across the street walking out of a cafe holding Olivia's hand. She had grown taller now, her curls tighter, her laugh louder. Ben was smiling at her, ruffling her hair the way Carl used to ruffle his eye. They didn't see me, or maybe they did and pretended not to. I stood there watching them cross the street. Olivia skipped ahead, pointing excitedly at a dog tied to a post. Ben followed slowly, his free hand deep in his coat pocket. My throat burned. I wasn't angry. I didn't feel rage or betrayal. Not in that moment. Just sorrow. Not for me, for what they'd chosen to forget. When Olivia was born, I stayed at the hospital for 18 hours straight. I changed her first diaper when Marissa was too tired to lift her head. I sang to her while Ben tried to figure out the car seat in the parking lot. Now she passed within 10 feet of me and didn't know my name. But I didn't call out. I didn't wave. I just turned, picked up my prescriptions, and walked away. Some memories are best left untouched, like antique glass. Beautiful, fragile, and too easy to shatter. That night, I sat on my porch swing legs tucked under a quilt Aaliyah had given me and listened to the crickets. I thought of Carl, of all the nights we sat like this, talking about everything and nothing. "I'm doing okay," I whispered to the dark. "I really am." The wind stirred the trees in response. Sometimes the dead are better at listening than the living. The next day, a package arrived. No note, just a book, On Grief and Gratefulness by Naomi Smith. Inside the cover was a post-it. Chapter 6. You'll know why. Alia. I smiled. She always seemed to know what I needed before I asked. I opened to Chapter 6. The title, The Family We Make. It told the story of a woman who built a new family from neighbors, old friends, and strangers who knocked at just the right time. One line stood out to me. Blood may call you by name, but only love will stay for the silence. I closed the book and let it rest on my lap. Yes, that was it. That was everything. Over the next few weeks, I became a quiet fixture at the Albright house. I didn't volunteer, formally didn't wear a badge or clock hours. But I brought baked goods, listened, sat beside women who stared out the window too long. There was Esther, a 68-year-old, who had fled her son's house after he began taking her disability checks. There was Junie, a 73-year-old widow who'd been couch hopping since her daughter moved overseas and sold her condo. There was May, silent stooped, who always crocheted with hands that trembled but never dropped a stitch. They became my people. We didn't talk about the past much. We didn't need to. We had all walked through fire. And we were still standing. One afternoon, as I served tea in the common room, the new director approached me. "There's a little girl asking for you," she said, with a puzzled look. "Says her name is Olivia." My chest clenched. I turned and saw her standing by the front door, olive green coat, 2 braids, a nervous smile. Ben was behind her, hands in his coat again, looking like he hadn't slept in days. "I told her we couldn't leave until she asked you herself," he said quietly. I stepped forward slowly, as if my bones had turned to glass. "Hi," I said. She nodded. "You're my grandma, right?" I swallowed. Yes, I am. I saw your picture here. The one with the other lady. I thought maybe you weren't mad anymore." I knelt down, ignoring the pain in my knees. "I was never mad at you." She looked relieved. "Dad said we weren't supposed to come here, but I told him that was dumb." I looked at Ben. He didn't flinch. Just said, "She cried when she saw your name on the sign." Asked a lot of questions. I didn't have a lot of answers. "I'm glad you came," I said. "Can I come again?" I smiled. "Anytime." She hugged me, quick and tight, then pulled back and said, "Are you still sick?" I shook my head. "No, not anymore." She seemed satisfied with that. Ben stepped forward. "I don't expect forgiveness, Mom. I know I failed you." I stood, hands shaking slightly. "I'm not interested in punishing you." He nodded. "So, what now?" I looked around. Women folding laundry. Someone humming in the kitchen. Sunlight pouring through the wide windows. "I live here now," I said simply. "This is my family." He looked down, then nodded. "Okay." He took Olivia's hand and turned to go. But before they stepped out the door, he looked back. "We'll see you again," he said. I believed him, but I didn't depend on it. That night, I told Aaliyah what happened. She didn't say much, just sipped her tea and handed me a blanket. "You don't owe them your healing," she said. "I know," I replied, "but maybe I owe myself the freedom not to carry it anymore." She raised her cup in a quiet toast. "To freedom." I tapped mine against hers. "To freedom indeed." 1 month later, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Rebecca, my younger sister. We hadn't spoken in years, not since our mother's funeral, where she accused me of hogging the grief. Her words, not mine. I stared at the envelope for an hour before opening it. Inside, a single page lined with tight, cursive handwriting I hadn't seen since the days we used to pass notes as children. "Lenora, I heard about what you did with the house. The news reached me through one of Marissa's social circles. She was furious, in case you're wondering. Said you betrayed the family. I won't pretend I understand all of it, but I will say this. I envy your clarity. I've lived my whole life trying to please people who forgot me the moment I turned my back. You always knew how to stand alone. I used to think that made you cold. Now I wonder if it just made you brave. I hope someday I can be that brave too." Or, I folded the letter and tucked it into the drawer where I kept Aaliyah's first card and Olivia's crayon drawing an uneven heart with the word Grandma spelled backwards. I didn't write back to Rebecca, but I didn't throw the letter away either. My days found rhythm. I woke early, took slow walks around the neighborhood, brought muffins to the shelter, sat in the garden with May as she crocheted tiny blankets for babies she'd never meet. Alia visited on her days off. Sometimes Olivia would come too. She liked to sit at my little kitchen table, swinging her feet under the chair and asking questions. So many questions. What was Daddy like when he was a baby? Did you have a dog when you were little? Why don't you live in a big house anymore? I answered them all. Every one. Truthfully, gently. Because she had a right to know the history she came from, even if her parents preferred to erase it. One morning, as we walked past the old schoolhouse near my cottage, Olivia reached for my hand and said, "I like your stories. You should write them down." I looked down at her, and something unlocked. That night, I pulled out a fresh notebook and wrote at the top of the page, "For Olivia, so you never forget." The stories poured out. Not just memories, but moments. My childhood. My courtship with Carl. The time Ben broke his arm trying to impress the neighbor girl. The night Marissa snuck out and I sat on the porch until dawn praying she'd come home. I wrote the hard parts too. The collapse. The silence. The slow realization that not all love is lasting. But I always ended each story the same way. And then someone came. Not who I expected, but exactly who I needed. Because that was the truth. I thought redemption would come from those who left, but it came from those who stayed. The notebook became a project. Alia helped me type it up. Olivia drew pictures in the margins. One of a tree, its roots tangled in a heart. One of a house with glowing windows and a plaque that read, "The Albright House." We printed a dozen copies, gave them to the shelter, to the library, one to the community center, and one to Ben. He didn't reply right away. But a week later, a package arrived. Inside, a leather-bound book with the words, "The Family That Stayed," engraved on the cover. It was my stories, professionally bound. Olivia's illustrations included, and a note, "Mom, you deserved better. From all of us. This doesn't fix it, but it remembers it." Ben. I held the book for a long time. Grief, it turns out, can live beside grace. I didn't change the will. Not because I was bitter, because I was clear. Love should not be a reward for guilt. It should be a reflection of truth. And my truth was this. I had found more warmth in the arms of strangers than in the silence of my own blood. I had built a life brick by quiet brick with people who showed up, no matter what. One morning, as I watered my violets, Aaliyah called. "Lenora," she said, "we got a grant. A big one. Enough to expand. We're going to open a second location." "That's wonderful," I said. "Where?" She paused, then smiled through the line. "Next town over. But I want to name it after someone again. If you'll let me." I laughed. "Haven't I been immortalized enough?" "This one," she said, "we'll call the Lenny Center, for the woman who taught us that showing up is everything." I wiped my hands on my apron. Felt something tighten in my chest, but it wasn't pain. It was purpose. It was joy. That night, I sat again on my porch swing. The sun dipped below the trees, the light soft and golden, and I whispered the words I once only thought in secret. I mattered, not because of what I gave and never received, but because I gave and I kept giving even when no one said thank you. Because I stood back up alone and chose to rise. Because when the world went silent, I wrote my own echo. Spring brought daffodils, then lilacs, and with them a new kind of breath in my life. I had always been a woman of rituals: laundry on Mondays, letters on Thursdays, banana bread every first Sunday. But now I was living a different rhythm, one made not of obligation, but intention. I had tea when I wanted. I napped without guilt. I watched the birds gather on my window ledge and learned to recognize their songs. It sounds small, I know, but for someone who spent her whole life measuring her worth by how much she gave to others, learning to exist without constant giving was a radical act. One morning, as I trimmed the violets, Olivia arrived with a surprise. "Field trip day," she said breathlessly, holding a permission slip. "But I told the teacher I had to stop here first." I raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" She nodded. "Because we're going to the community center and I wanted to tell everyone, you're the one who made it." I laughed, really laughed. "Oh, sweetheart, I didn't make it. I just helped it happen." "Same thing," she said simply. "You made it by caring." She turned and ran back to the car where Ben was waiting. He gave me a hesitant wave, and I nodded. That was all we needed now. Not apologies. Just presents. Later that week, I visited the community center with a basket of warm rolls and honey butter. The women greeted me like family. May the quiet crocheter had finished an entire quilt and laid it on the couch in the common room. Spring quilt, she said, for the next woman who shows up needing warmth. I touched the fabric, my fingers catching on each tiny stitch. Looks like love, I said. It is, she whispered. In thread. We sat together under the morning light and listened to the hum of a home built not from blood, but from kindness. A few days later, I received an invitation. Olivia's school was hosting Grandparents' Day. At first, I stared at the envelope, wondered if it had been sent to me by mistake. But then I saw the handwriting, her careful printing letters too big for the lines. Dear Grandma Lenny, can you come to my class on Friday? You don't have to bring anything, just stories. Love, Olivia. I pressed the paper to my chest. Carl would have wept with pride. I put on my best cardigan, brushed my silver hair back, and walked into that school like I belonged there because I did. Olivia introduced me to everyone as the bravest grandma ever. I sat in a tiny chair beside a boy named Max, whose grandmother couldn't make it, and told them about how the moon always looked bigger when you were walking alone, but smaller when someone held your hand. They all stared at me, mouths open. You should write a book, one said. I smiled. I already did. Afterward, as the teacher thanked me for coming, she leaned in and said, She talks about you all the time, you know. You've become her lighthouse. I blinked, swallowed hard, nodded, because I had always been the lighthouse. I just never noticed who finally came home to its glow. The seasons turned again. Summer came. I spent more time at the center, helped plan a new garden, taught a few of the women how to make lentil soup from scratch. We laughed. We shared. We healed. Ben started visiting once a month. No speeches, just silence and slow gestures. Fixing the door, replacing a bulb, letting Olivia braid my hair while he read quietly in the corner. Marissa hadn't come. I didn't expect her to, but one day I received an envelope with her name on the return address. Inside was a check, a sizable one. No note, no explanation. I tore it in half, not out of anger, but because you can't buy your way back into someone's soul. One morning, as I stood in the kitchen kneading dough, Aaliyah called. You've got mail, she said, teasing. Want me to bring it over? She arrived with a stack of envelopes and a glint in her eye. Looks like fan mail, she joked. In truth, they were letters from women who'd read my little book copies from the library, the shelter, or passed from hand to hand. Some were older, some were young. One said she was only 22 but felt 80 inside. Another said she had been homeless for 6 years, and my words made her believe in stillness that didn't mean surrender. I sat on the porch surrounded by these pieces of paper and realized something I'd never dared to admit. I had never been invisible. They just weren't looking. Months later, the Lenny Center opened. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was humble but heartfelt. There was lemonade and folding chairs. A young woman stood beside me and said, This place already saved my life, and it's only been open a week. I hugged her. I never asked her name. It didn't matter. What mattered was that she was seen. Like I had finally been. That night, I stood at the edge of the garden, fireflies blinking around me, and thought about how easy it is to disappear in this world when you're old and quiet and kind. But I had not disappeared. I had detonated, silently. And from the rubble, I built something that would last longer than memory. Something louder than absence. Something that proved I had lived and mattered. I sat at my desk, opened my notebook, and wrote the last line of the final chapter. They vanished when I got sick. But I stayed, and in the end, that was enough. A year passed, just like that. A dozen seasons of small joy and deliberate quietude. I marked time not with holidays or birthdays, but with flowerings. First, the violets, then the magnolias, the peonies, and finally, the asters, bright as bruises. I no longer checked the calendar for calls or visits. I no longer waited for people who had already left. Instead, I learned to see beauty in the overlooked the same way I had once cared for patients too far gone for miracles. One afternoon, as I returned from the farmer's market with a bag full of peaches and sourdough, I saw her again. Marissa. She stood beside her car in my driveway, arms crossed, sunglasses perched high, her expression unreadable. I took my time walking up. Mom, she said. It still startled me, that word. It had become foreign, like something I once wore and outgrew. I didn't know if you'd still live here, she said. I do, I replied. A long silence followed. She removed her sunglasses. Her eyes were rimmed with red. I got your letter. The one from the lawyer. I didn't understand at first. I thought you were being cruel. I said nothing. She looked down. But I've been reading your book, the one Olivia left on the kitchen table. Every night, just a few pages. At first I was angry, then ashamed. Then I didn't know what to feel. I held the bag of peaches tighter. She took a breath. I didn't show up. I know that now. I let life carry me too far without looking back. I waited. Not because I needed more, but because I was no longer rushing to forgive. Finally, she said, I came here to tell you something. I tilted my head. I don't deserve to be your daughter anymore. But I'd still like to visit, maybe just as someone who once knew the sound of your laugh. My throat clenched. I set the bag down gently on the porch, then opened the door. Come inside, I said. She stepped over the threshold like it was sacred ground. It was. We sat at the table, the same one where Olivia braided my hair and Aaliyah brought soup. I poured tea. She took her cup with both hands like she used to when she was little and wanted to feel grown up. I don't expect anything, she said. You shouldn't, I replied. More silence. But it wasn't empty. It was space being made. She looked around. You've made something beautiful here. I didn't do it alone. She nodded. That's what scares me, that you don't need us anymore. I gave a soft smile. I needed you once. Deeply. You didn't come, she winced. But I wasn't finished. But now, I'm not waiting anymore. That's the gift I gave myself. She looked up, eyes full of things she couldn't say. So I said them for her. I'm not angry anymore, Marissa. But I won't rewrite the past. I won't revise the will. This life, this peace. It cost me too much to give it back for guilt. I know, she whispered. But you can come, I added. Not as my daughter. Just as a woman trying to remember what love is. She nodded slowly. It was enough. After she left, I stood at the kitchen sink and watched the shadows stretch across the garden. A figure walked along the edge, Aaliyah. She waved. I waved back. In that moment, I saw it all clearly. Love isn't loud. It isn't flashy or transactional. It doesn't always look like family or sound like apologies. Sometimes it's just showing up. With lemon bars. With bandages. With silence. Love is a hand on your shoulder after everyone else has gone. Weeks passed. Marissa visited again. Then again. She didn't stay long, didn't push, didn't ask for restoration. Just helped water the violets. Sat through an entire hour of Olivia's stories. Once she even helped serve soup at the center, eyes lowered the whole time. The women welcomed her, gently, without question. We knew the language of return. It wasn't dramatic. It was tender, unassuming, necessary. One night as we sat by the fire, Olivia curled at my feet, I felt something loosen in my chest. Something I didn't know I was still holding. Grief, maybe. Or the need to be seen by the people who forgot me. It slipped away like steam. I was not invisible. Not anymore. The Albright house now had 3 locations. The Lenny Center was building a new wing. Ben brought fresh paint to the original shelter and quietly fixed things without being asked. Marissa started bringing pastries on Sundays, store-bought but carefully chosen. And me, I wrote stories, letters, testimonies. I became the historian of quiet resilience, the keeper of the ledger of women who refused to disappear. One letter I wrote read, to the woman reading this years from now, if they leave you when you need them most, let them. But don't vanish. Don't shrink. Don't become small for the sake of their comfort. You are allowed to be the thunder in your own quiet sky. You are allowed to start over. You are allowed to be enough even if no one claps. And one day, someone will look at you the way you've always deserved to be seen. With nothing but reverence. I signed it. Ellie? And tucked it inside the final copy of my book to be placed in the 4th shelter we were planning. It would sit on a wooden shelf between cookbooks and well-worn novels, waiting for someone who needed to know they weren't alone. Because they weren't Not anymore. The fourth shelter opened in late fall. Crisp air, red leaves crunching underfoot, the kind of sky that holds its breath before snow. The building was an old church, lovingly converted into something warmer, walls repainted in calming tones, wide windows letting in golden light. The stained glass windows were preserved, casting soft colors across the hardwood floors. They named it the Hearth. Not after me this time. That was my request. Call it something that feels like home, I told Aaliyah. And she did. At the dedication, I sat in the back, wrapped in a shawl that once belonged to Carl's mother. Olivia stood beside me, holding my hand. Her eyes were wide, sparkling with the kind of wonder that children carry like lanterns in the dark. As the mayor gave a short speech, the audience clapped politely. But it was the next speaker who turned my heart inside out. Marissa. I hadn't known she would speak. I almost stood to leave, but Olivia squeezed my hand. And I stayed. Marissa stepped up to the podium, visibly nervous. Her papers shook slightly, but her voice when it came was strong. I grew up thinking that love was something we earned, she said. Through grades, through promotions, through accomplishments. I thought showing up late still counted if you brought flowers. I thought silence could be forgiven if life got busy. She looked up, eyes scanning the crowd until they found mine. But then I watched someone I loved, someone who had always shown up for me, be forgotten by the very people she once carried. I was one of them. The room held its breath. I didn't lose her because she disappeared, Marissa continued. I lost her because I stopped listening, and when I finally did, she had already built a new world without me. She smiled, something fragile and true, but she still let me walk back in. Not through the front door, but through the garden gate. And that gate will always stay with me. She ended with this. This building is not just walls. It's a second chance. For women like my mother, for women like me. The applause was thunderous, but I heard nothing. Just the sound of healing folding itself into my ribs. After the ceremony, we stood together outside under a sycamore tree, the wind catching the edges of our coats. You didn't have to say all that, I told her. I did, she said. For me. We didn't hug. Not yet. But she walked me to the car. And that, too, was a beginning. The weeks that followed settled like mist over a pond. Soft, consistent, gentle. I visited the Hearth every Tuesday, helped lead writing workshops, told stories, sat beside women who had forgotten how to use their voices, taught them to say their names again like declarations. Aaliyah watched it all with quiet pride. You've become the root system, she said once. Not the flower, the roots, invisible but holding everything up. I looked at my hands, weathered, soft now, but still steady. Yes, I said. That feels right. One morning, a young woman named Skyla came into the Hearth. Barely 20, skin like parchment, eyes full of sleep deprivation and questions. She wouldn't speak to anyone, until I brought her tea and said, "You remind me of someone I once held when she was too angry to cry." She looked up. "Who?" "My daughter," I replied. She didn't say anything then. But 2 days later, she sat beside me and whispered, "I haven't slept in a real bed in 6 weeks." I nodded. Then tonight, I said, "You'll sleep in one with clean sheets and a lock on the door. And tomorrow we'll write your name on a new page." I began collecting their names. First in my notebook, then in a leather-bound journal. The ledger of the stayed. It wasn't formal, just names and small details. June 64th, used to sing on street corners. Can't make eye contact when thanked. Ramona, 71, former teacher. Lost her pension to her son's addiction. Skyla, 20, speaks in whispers. Draws birds in the margins of every note. Each name a living echo of women who had been invisible too long. Each one a brick in the legacy I was now choosing to leave. Not marble, not money, but memory. That Christmas, I hosted dinner in the Hearth kitchen. Olivia helped decorate hanging paper snowflakes from the beams. Ben brought a ham and stayed to wash dishes. Marissa arrived late with a pot of mulled cider and her heart in her hands. There were no speeches, no staged forgiveness, just warmth. At one point, May, who rarely spoke above a whisper, clinked her spoon against her glass and said, "This is the first time in 15 years I've eaten Christmas dinner with people who knew my name." We all clapped, quietly, because that was how love sounded now. Later, as I walked Olivia to the car, she looked up at me and asked, "Grandma, do you think you'll ever leave here?" I paused. "No," I said softly. "Not really." She frowned. "But what if you get sick again?" I bent down to meet her gaze. "If I do," I said, "there will be people here. Real ones. Who will stay?" She nodded solemnly. "Then I'm glad you built this." I kissed her forehead. "So am I." That night, I wrote in the ledger again. Not a name this time. Just a line. "You are not what they left behind. You are what rises in the absence. Keep rising." There was a time when I thought legacy was about what you passed down: photos, china sets, handwritten recipes folded into flower-specked pages. But now I know better. Legacy isn't the thing. It's the echo. It's what continues moving after you've gone quiet. One morning, while setting up the reading nook at the hearth, a young volunteer named Iris asked me a question I wasn't prepared for. "Miss Lenora," she said shyly, "do you ever get tired of telling your story?" I blinked. It wasn't asked rudely, just honestly, the way only young people can be. I sat down beside her, folded my hands over my knee. "No," I said slowly. "I get tired of living in it. But telling it, that's how I set it down. One piece at a time." She smiled. "I like that." Then she added, "Do you ever think about writing something new?" That stopped me, because I hadn't. Not really. My story had always been about what happened to me, what I endured, what I reclaimed, but I hadn't considered what might come next, what I might create that wasn't rooted in pain. I looked down at my hands again, capable still, even if slower. "Yes," I whispered. "Maybe it's time." That afternoon, I started a new notebook. This one didn't begin with a hospital bed or a voicemail never returned. It began with a garden. The title scrawled across the first page read, "Things That Bloomed After." Inside, I wrote about Skyla's birds and May's quilt. I wrote about Olivia's backwards hearts and Marissa's unsure, unpracticed kindness. I wrote about Aaliyah, who became the daughter I never bore, and about Carl, who would have laughed at how it all turned out. Me, the quiet one, at the center of a movement made of softness. I wrote about the hearth, about women who were told they were too loud, too needy, too angry. Women who had the audacity to outlive abandonment. Marissa came by one evening with a tin of shortbread cookies and 2 steaming cups of tea. "I'm not here for anything," she said as she sat down. "Just wanted to sit." I nodded. We sat in silence for a long time. The kind that no longer itched between us. Eventually, she said, "Do you remember the time I ran away? I was 14. You found me at that gas station crying in the freezer aisle." I remember I said, "I thought you'd yell, but you just wrapped your coat around me and told the clerk, 'She's coming home now.'" Shh. I smiled softly. She looked down. "I've thought about that moment a lot lately. How sure your voice was. How calm." I was terrified, I admitted. "But I couldn't let you see it. You needed someone steady." She nodded. "You still are." There were tears in her eyes, but neither of us wiped them away. Later that week, Olivia came over with a school assignment. "Write about someone who inspires you." She chose me. "Can I read it to you?" she asked. "Please," I said, trying not to sound like I was already crying. She stood in the living room and cleared her throat like a tiny professor. "My grandma is the bravest person I know. Not because she fought dragons or flew planes, but because when her family left, she stayed kind. She gave her house to strangers and made them family. She grows flowers and writes books and always makes room at her table. She says love is quiet and strong and shows up even when it hurts. And I want to be just like her." When she finished, I clapped until my palms ached. That night, I added another page to Things That Bloomed After. A girl with wild curls and a lionheart voice said she wanted to be like me, and for the first time, I believed I was someone worth becoming. The holidays came again. I hosted another dinner at the hearth. Not just for the residents this time, but for their children, their grandchildren, and the people who had begun to orbit the quiet sun of our little sanctuary. We had to rent extra chairs. Skyla sang. May read a poem she had written about winter and forgiveness. Ben carved the turkey. Marissa brought actual homemade pie. It was burnt, but no one said a word. Olivia played the piano, a single clumsy version of Silent Night that still made everyone tear up. After dinner, Aaliyah clinked her glass. I want to propose something, she said. A new title for Lenora. Everyone leaned in. Matron Emeritus of the Hearth Network, she said proudly. Founder of foundations. Guardian of second chances. Laughter rippled through the room. I flushed. I'm not dead yet, I said. You're not allowed to die, Skyla called from across the table. More laughter, then silence. And then applause. Long sustained, heartfelt. Not for what I'd lost, but for what I'd built, for what I'd become. That night, I stood by the window long after the last dish was washed. Snow had begun to fall, slow, quiet, sacred. And I thought, there are lives that are loud, and there are lives like mine, the kind that build cathedrals out of silence, the kind that survive fire and frost and come back blooming, the kind that are not defined by what was taken, but by what was given and given again. I turned off the lights. Let the snow keep falling. Let the echo of kindness linger. The next spring, something unexpected happened. I received a call from a woman named Dr. Helena Bryce, a professor from a nearby university. Her voice was warm, measured, the kind of tone people use when delivering both good news and difficult truths. I've been reading your book, she said. The one you published locally, The Family That Stayed. One of my students brought it to my attention. Lenora, would you consider speaking to our social work graduate seminar? The students are studying non-traditional kinship networks and, well, you've built something quietly revolutionary. I nearly dropped the phone. I'm not a speaker, I said quickly. I'm barely a writer. Then speak like you write, she replied. Honestly? Without decoration, that's what they need. I said yes, then hung up and immediately questioned my sanity. But something inside me, some flicker of the woman I'd become, steadied me. I remembered Olivia's tiny voice saying I was the bravest person she knew. I remembered Skyla May Aaliyah, the women at the hearth, and the Lenny Center. I remembered the ledger. Maybe it was time to tell the story from the mountaintop, not just the garden. The seminar was held in an old lecture hall with tiered seats and flickering fluorescent lights. The air buzzed with youth notebooks, coffee, and curiosity. I wore my soft gray shawl, the one with Carl's initials stitched discreetly in the corner, and held my note cards like armor. Alia came with me, sat in the front row. Ben was there too, surprising me. He took the afternoon off, said Olivia made him promise. Marissa did not come. I didn't ask why. I just hoped quietly that she would hear about it someday. I stepped up to the podium. The microphone hissed, and then I spoke. I am not a therapist. I am not a clinician or a researcher. I'm just a woman who spent 74 years giving everything she had to everyone around her and found herself completely alone when she needed help most. The room stilled. I collapsed in my kitchen and lay on the floor for hours. My phone was fully charged, but no one was calling. My children, grown successful, beloved by the world, were silent. I didn't hear from them until weeks later, and even then their apologies came wrapped in convenience. A few students looked down. Some didn't blink. I want to talk about what comes after abandonment. I want to talk about the people who arrive late but still arrive, the strangers who become sisters, the nurses who become daughters, the girls who braid your hair and hand you crayons and ask if you're still sick. I told them about the shelters, about the tea, about the ledger. I finished with this. Family is not what shares your last name. Family is who shows up when your breath is thin and your body is tired and your soul is halfway convinced it no longer matters. The ones who stay, they are the legacy, not the ones who leave. When I sat down, there was no applause, just silence, the kind that holds weight. And then slowly one clap, then two, until the whole room stood, not for me, but for the story I carried. Afterward, a young woman approached me, early 20s, braids, tear-streaked cheeks. My mom's in a nursing home. I haven't visited in 3 years, she said. I thought she didn't want me around. But now, she didn't finish. She didn't need to. I just took her hand and said, then go. Today, not to fix anything, just to be there. She nodded and left. Maybe she went, maybe she didn't. But the seed had been planted. 2 weeks later, I received a thick envelope from the university. Inside was a certificate, in honor of Lenora Albright, guest lecturer in empathy and legacy studies. for reshaping how we define care. It wasn't framed. It wasn't gilded. But I held it like it was gold. Back at the hearth, we started a new program. Stories of the Stayed. Every Thursday, women gathered in the common room and told one moment from their past when someone stayed, or didn't. Sometimes they spoke for 20 minutes. Sometimes they said one sentence and cried. Sometimes they stayed silent the entire session until they were ready. We didn't push. We just listened. Marissa visited again, quietly slipping in during one of the sessions. She sat in the back near the bookshelf, fingers tangled in her coat. She didn't speak, but she didn't leave. Afterward, she hugged me. Not tight, not performative. Just long enough to say, "I'm trying." And that was more than enough. Spring turned to summer. Olivia graduated from elementary school. She wore a white dress and read a poem about kindness. I wept. Ben held my hand. Marissa brought tissues. It felt somehow like a beginning, not a return. A new thing entirely. I kept writing. Things that bloomed after became a full book. A hybrid memoir and meditation. Dana helped me publish it through a small press. The first print run sold out. The second was requested by several women's shelters across the state. On the back cover was this quote: "I used to think I was forgotten. Now I know I was just waiting for the right people to remember me." My photo, gray shawl, silver hair, slight smile sat beside it. I hated the picture. Aaliyah loved it. We compromised. I let it stay. I didn't change the will. But I did leave a letter for Marissa to be opened one day far in the future when I'm gone, and she's older and ready to see all of me. It reads, "You weren't there when I fell, but you're here now. And that is enough. We don't get to rewrite the past, but we can write gently from here. Love always, Mom." And I keep showing up. At the hearth, at the garden, in the ledger, in Olivia's drawings, in the trembling hands of women writing their names again on clean white pages. Lenora Albright is not famous, but she is unforgettable. Not for the stories she told, but for the ones she listened to, and the ones she never let disappear. There is a strange kind of peace that arrives when you've stopped expecting things to return the way they were. You begin to make room for what is no longer what was, or what should have been. I no longer clung to hope in the same way. It didn't drive me anymore. It simply lived in me like a quiet candle that didn't need to burn bright to stay alive. One morning, as I sat on the porch swing sipping tea, a soft knock came at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened it to find a woman in her late 40s, short salt and pepper hair tucked beneath a worn ball cap. Her eyes were sharp but hesitant. She clutched a faded envelope. "Mrs. Albright." I nodded. I don't know if you remember my mother, Georgia Claremont. She passed away at the old county hospital about 12 years ago. You were her nurse." The name hit me like warm wind through a closed window. Georgia. Breast cancer. Had a daughter named Helen who never came to visit. Until now. "She wrote this for you before she died," the woman said. "But I didn't have the courage to send it then. I wasn't ready. But I read about you in the paper. The Hearth Network, the book, everything. And I thought, maybe I should finally bring it." She placed the envelope in my hands, then turned and left, without another word. I went inside and opened it. The paper was yellowed ink, slightly smudged but still readable. "Lenora, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm sorry my daughter didn't visit. Don't blame her. She's scared of endings. Always has been. But you made mine soft. You talked to me like I wasn't dying. You brushed my hair like I was still someone worth touching. And that matters more than anything they'll say at my funeral. If you ever feel forgotten, just know this. I remembered you. I remembered everything. Love, Georgia." I folded the letter, tears slipping silently down my face. Then I added her name to the ledger of the stayed, not because she stayed for someone else, but because she stayed inside me. The next day, I showed the letter to Aaliyah. She didn't speak, just nodded, eyes glassy. "We should do something with these," she said. "With what?" "All of them. Your ledger, the letters, the stories. They shouldn't just sit in a drawer. They should live in the world." "What are you thinking?" I asked. She hesitated, then smiled. "A museum, a living one. We called it The Room That Stayed." It wasn't grand, just a wing in one of the shelters converted into a space of memory. One wall held copies of letters from women across the country. Another was filled with framed photos, some new, some recovered from the bottom of boxes no one had opened in years. In the center, a desk with an open journal. A sign above it read, "Write down what you were never allowed to say." We didn't monitor it. Didn't police the language? And within a month, the pages were full. Some wrote stories of abuse, of betrayal, of regret. Others wrote poetry. Others just scribbled their names over and over as if willing the world to remember they existed. One child wrote, "I think my grandma was sad but didn't tell us. I wish I had hugged her more." I cried when I read that one, because it was me, and it was every woman who had given quietly and vanished slowly. Ben came to see the room. He stood in the center, surrounded by letters, art voices that refused to be erased. "I didn't know it was this big," he said. "It always was," I replied. "You just didn't look." He nodded. He didn't make excuses anymore. He didn't need to. He showed up and stayed. That evening, Olivia asked if she could write something for the journal. She took her time, tongue peeking from the corner of her mouth as she thought. Then she wrote, "Sometimes people say grandmas are soft, but mine is strong. Like a tree that doesn't fall in the storm. She holds everyone, even the people who forget they need holding." I wanted to frame it, but she shook her head. "No," she said. "Leave it here. Someone else might need it more." She understood the mission better than most adults ever would. One night, as I closed the journal and turned off the lights in the exhibit room, I caught my reflection in the window. Older now, lines deeper, but still luminous. Not from makeup, from memory. I had become a mirror of the women I served, a mosaic of every soul who chose to stay. The next morning, I began planning something new. A retreat for women over 60, not therapy, not recovery, reclamation. We'd gather in a quiet cabin near the river. No cell phones, no expectations, just hammocks, tea-soft music, and the space to speak without interruption. I called it the Unforgotten Weekend. We filled all 20 spots within a week. Women from 5 states, some coming alone, some bringing their own daughters for the first time in years. One woman wrote, "I've never been away from my family, but I've never felt like I belonged to them either. Maybe this is where I'll finally feel like someone." As I packed supplies, journals, warm blankets, sun hats, I realized something profound. My life was no longer about recovery. It was about invitation, about giving others a taste of what I had waited too long to find. Not forgiveness, but space. Not healing, but wholeness. And I am whole now. Not because they came back, but because I stopped leaving myself. The retreat was held in late summer when the air was thick with bees and time moved slow as molasses. The cabin sat at the edge of a quiet lake wrapped in pine and birch trees. The kind of place where silence feels sacred, not lonely. We arrived one by one, women with gray in their hair and grief in their bones. Some limped, others laughed too loudly to hide nerves. Many of them carried bags heavier than their backs could justify, some physical, some invisible. But all of us arrived with one thing in common. We had stayed too long in places we were meant to leave. The first evening, I stood on the porch and looked out at the group as they sat in a loose circle. I didn't prepare a speech. I didn't need to. "I want to start with one rule," I said. They waited. "You don't owe anyone a version of yourself that hurts." No one clapped. They just nodded, because they understood. The days unfolded gently. Mornings began with tea and long silences. Not awkward ones, just the kind that hold space. No one was expected to speak. They simply could if they wanted. One woman, Eliza, shared how she'd been the family's caretaker for 30 years. Husband, children, aging parents, until one day she realized no one had asked her how she was in over a decade. "They said I was strong," she said, voice shaking, "but they meant I was disposable." Another woman, Maeve, admitted she'd lived with her son and daughter-in-law until they slowly stopped inviting her to dinner. "They started locking the fridge," she whispered. Each story was met not with advice, but presence. No one tried to fix anything. We just listened. And that, I've learned, is its own form of medicine. On the third night, we built a small bonfire by the lake. I brought out a basket filled with slips of paper. "Write something down," I said. "Something you've carried too long." They didn't ask questions. They wrote. One by one, they stepped forward and tossed their words into the fire. I'm sorry I didn't leave sooner. I forgive myself for believing love had to hurt. I mattered, even if no one said it. As the flames curled each confession into smoke, I felt the air shift. Lighter, weeder, like a window had opened in all of us. Afterward, Maeve sat beside me. I always thought letting go would feel like giving up, she said. But it feels like breathing. I took her hand. Because it is. On the final morning, we gathered by the water. Each woman was given a small stone. Keep it, I told them. Write your name on it. Hide it somewhere. Let it remind you that you existed before the pain, before the silence, before they forgot. They all did. Some cried. Some smiled. One woman tossed her stone into the lake, saying, "Let them chase it if they care." We all laughed. It was the kind of laughter that mends. After the retreat, I returned home and found a letter on my porch. From Marissa. The handwriting had changed, looser now. Less polished. More real. Mom, I've spent so much of my life building a world where I didn't have to feel. I thought if I stayed busy enough, if I succeeded enough, I could avoid the ache. But then I started reading your stories. The parts you didn't tell me. The pain I never wanted to see. And I realized, I didn't lose you when you got sick. I lost you when I stopped showing up. If you'll have me, really have me, I want to be a part of what you're building. Not out of guilt, out of awe. I read it twice. Then set it on the mantel beside Olivia's drawing and George's letter. I didn't need to reply. She would know. A week later, Marissa arrived at the hearth with a tray of fresh scones and a new journal. I want to start volunteering, she said. The women nodded their greetings. No fanfare, no ceremony. Just inclusion. Sometimes redemption doesn't need trumpets. Sometimes it arrives with flour on its hands and a second try in its eyes. That afternoon, Olivia helped me plant new flowers in the hearth's garden. Do you think flowers get tired of blooming? She asked. No, I said. But I think they need time to rest. She nodded, thoughtful. Like people? Exactly. She pressed a small seed into the dirt, covered it with care. I want to grow something that stays, she whispered. I touched her back. You already are. Later that evening, as the sky turned lavender and the porch light flickered on, I sat with Ben, Aaliyah, and Marissa. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. But as the stars blinked into place overhead, I said, do you think people can change after all? Ben looked down. Marissa looked at me. Ilya smiled. I think she said that people don't always change, but sometimes they return to themselves. And I knew then that's what I had done. Not become someone new, but remembered the woman I had always been. Steady, bright, unyielding, and still blooming. The ledger is almost full now. Not because I'm running out of stories, but because the women who come through our doors have started writing their own. I no longer need to document every name. They've begun speaking them aloud. To one another, to the mirror, to the world. There's power in being able to say, this is what happened to me. But there's something even greater in declaring, this is who I am now. We're building a library now. Not just a bookshelf or a reading nook, but a real library. The Hearths Board approved the budget last month. Alia says it's our most ambitious project yet, but I see it as a natural evolution. A home for the voices that were once silenced. We'll stock it with memoirs, poetry, cookbooks, grief guides, and journals filled with stories handwritten on napkins and scraps. We'll call it the Quiet Library, not because the voices there are soft, but because they are deliberate, intentional. They don't shout for attention. They wait for it to arrive on its own terms. Marissa visits regularly now. Sometimes she helps at the shelter. Sometimes she just sits beside me with tea. She's not trying to erase the past anymore. She's simply living the present differently. The other day she said, I used to think you wanted me to be perfect. I raised an eyebrow. You did, she insisted. Even when you didn't say it. You were always calm, always capable. I thought love looked like that. Like never needing anything. I looked at her for a long moment. That wasn't love, I said. That was fear. Fear that if I asked too much, I'd lose everything. She nodded. And you did anyway. I reached across the table, touched her hand. But I also gained One morning, Olivia burst through the door with a binder clutched in her arms. "I'm doing my class project on you," she announced. "You and the hearth. You're my real-life hero." I chuckled. "Do I get a cape?" "No," she grinned. "Just your stories. And maybe a statue." I laughed harder than I had in weeks. "Promise me something," I said once we'd caught our breath. "Anything? Don't ever forget how much you're allowed to matter, even when no one says it out loud." She nodded solemnly. "I won't. I have you." And I believed her. I've been sleeping deeper lately, waking slower. Sometimes my joints ache more than they used to. My doctor says I'm strong for my age, which always makes me roll my eyes, as if my bones needed to be measured against a clock. But I feel no fear, not anymore, not even of what's coming. Because when it does, whether it's in a year or a decade, I know I'll be held, not by the children I raised, but by the women I became a mother to even when I didn't mean to. By the ledger, the library, the garden, the rooms filled with quiet reclamation. I will not vanish. I will not be pitied. I will be remembered. By strangers who became kin. By the girl with backwards hearts. By the daughter who came back through the garden gate. The last page of the ledger will read, "Lenora Albright, Sentior." She stayed for herself, at last. Tonight, as I sit by the fire, the lights of the shelter glowing soft and golden behind me, I hear music inside Skyla humming. May reading aloud, someone boiling tea in the kitchen. Alia sits beside me. We don't talk. We just breathe. And I think, this is the life I didn't know I was allowed to have. Not one built on sacrifice, but on sanctuary. A life not shaped by who left, but by who remained. And I remained too. So this is where it ends. Not in bitterness, not in rage, not even in sadness, but in stillness, in the hush that follows a long, hard rain, the kind that soaks the roots and softens the earth for something new to grow. They left when I got sick. That is true. My family, my flesh, my own. But I stayed. I stayed for the woman I forgot. I was resilient, steady, luminous. I stayed for the strangers who became sisters, daughters, mothers, and mirrors. I stayed long enough to build something that will outlive me, not in stone, but in story. And you, if you're still listening, still watching, still wondering whether you too have been forgotten, let me be the echo that reminds you, you are not too late. You are not too much. You are not alone. If you've ever been left behind, left unseen, left unheard, then write your name in the ledger. Sit at our table. Pour the tea. There is space for you here, because silence is not the end. Sometimes it's just the opening of a door, and when you walk through it, you become the one who stays. Always. Lenora.